Okay, next up, we have Jeremy Mennis, mapping the historical landscapes of the Underground Railroad, and Jeremy will be joining us virtually from the beach.
Hi, everybody. So thanks for posting my slides. Do I just ask you to advance them, or do I do that myself?
You can ask for the control so that you can.
Oh, I see. I got you.
You can control now.
Okay. Just figuring out how I advance my slides here. Oh, okay, gotcha. All right, cool. Thanks so much for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I wish I was there in person with you, but I'm really glad to be able to join you virtually. My name is Jeremy Mennis. I'm a professor in geography and urban studies at Temple University. I want to talk about mapping the historical landscapes of the Underground Railroad. This is a pretty new direction for me research-wise, and I don't know much about it, to be honest, but I'm really enjoying the learning process. This is a photo I took myself in Maryland's Eastern Shore region. That's the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay, where this research is based. And that house on the left is actually a general store that's been there since at least the 1850s. That's where Harriet Tubman was famously hit in the head by a thrown object. And it caused her later in life sleeping spells and other sorts of cognitive problems throughout her life, but was an influential event. And I was just amazed to actually be able to visit these kinds of places. I got started in this research just by being in the Eastern Shore of Maryland and found out what an incredibly rich history that it had related to the Underground Railroad. This was the birthplace of Harriet Tubman. And this is a mural in this small town of Cambridge, Maryland, and it shows Harriet Tubman reaching through a brick wall, obviously symbolizing the escape through that sort of boundary of slavery. And what I was really fascinated by looking at this mural was this invitation she was giving to those escaping slavery to go sort of beyond this human-made structure, this brick wall, and behind her is this nature scene filled with sort of abundant vegetation, water. You can see a rowboat behind her right there. And I really became fascinated as a geographer by the role of the natural and built landscapes in sort of helping with escape from slavery, prohibiting or mitigating escape from slavery, and how that worked, the role of the natural and built environment in this process. And that's sort of what led me forward in this. The sort of larger project here is about that social built and natural environment, particularly in Maryland's Eastern Shore. I'll show you a map in just a second, but also how that intersects with the agency of individuals, of course, who are trying to escape from slavery. But what I really wanted to do, my research objective, I guess, for this particular part of this larger project is to try and understand or represent those features of the landscape that might confer elements of risk and protection to those escaping from slavery. So that's really what I'm going to talk about here. And this is actually not so different an idea generally from the kind of research that I've been doing for the last 15 years, which is much more about public health. But this is a publication from 2013 that was an International Journal of Geographical Information Science about landscapes and risk and protection for African American youth in the city of Philadelphia. We're focusing on risk and protection regarding substance use and other kinds of risky behaviors, but we interviewed a number of youth in Philadelphia, asking about the places they go, capturing their activity spaces, what locations were risky, what were safe, and we built this interface to help explore those data for these different locations. The locations given on this map have been spatially randomized, so they don't represent any actual individual person right here. But you get the idea that someone's activity space confers elements of risk and protection to their health. And it's sort of the same idea that I wanted to get to with the Underground Railroad. And I'm gonna probably go through these slides a little quickly, but I just want to connect it to some of the previous work that's been done in cartography and geographic information science. the work that Mei-Po Kwan, colleagues, and others have done on geonarratives, where they capture qualitative information about people's daily experiences and travels through their daily lives and, represent it cartographically and try and represent where people might fear for the safety, where they feel safe, and so on. Other work by Alberto Giordano on spatial humanities related to risk and protection during the Holocaust right here. This is a map of people's travels in a particular city, going to get food, how they might have to go to the marketplace to get food, and where those places of danger might have been for those people at that time. And other research related to historical GIS, identifying routes of travel. In this case, some recent work published in IJGIS on routes in the present day Middle East and reconstructing those routes from historical information. And finally, I looked as much as I could to find this kind of research on the Underground Railroad. I didn't find much, which kind of made me feel good because I was like, oh, I'm going to be able to make some kind of new contribution here. But I did find this work by Cheryl LaRoche, in which she integrated kind of historical data on what we thought we knew about historical Underground Railroad routes. This is in the Midwest. And what we know about free African-American settlements at that time, and the idea that some of those routes probably went through those African-American settlements that were free because they offered some level of protection. So in my research here, I focused on the Eastern Shore. When we talk about the Eastern Shore, it's not actually the shore of the Atlantic Ocean, it's the shoreline of the Chesapeake Bay. You can see Washington, D.C. is over here. These are my three county study area right here, Talbot, Caroline, and Dorchester counties. This is Maryland. The city of Philadelphia is a little bit north here off the map. These are some photos I took of what the area looks like right now. So a lot of water everywhere, a lot of marsh areas and so on. This is basically a giant tidal estuary. And a lot of older development. I'd say the population of these areas is pretty similar to what it was, frankly, in the 1850s. There's certainly more populations in the towns and some built up areas, but most of the rural areas may have had more population, frankly, in the 1850s than they do now. One of the challenges here, of course, is that the landscape we see now is not the landscape that existed in the 1850s, just the natural landscape. So there's a lot of water there, but I think there's actually more water in some of the central areas now than there was because of rising sea levels. So this is just remotely sensed imagery that's taken from Google Maps. This is a Blackwater Wildlife Refuge, which is a large marsh area in the middle of Dorchester County. And this is like right where essentially Harriet Tubman was born and grew up, right just north of this water area right here. You can see in 2020, it's a much larger area than it was even in 1985. So who knows what it was 150, 170 years ago. So what to do about that? Well, I started looking for historical maps, and I did get this one from of Maryland, made by Simon Martinet, who was authorized by the state of Maryland to create this map. It was published in 1865, but the data was collected, prior to the Civil War through walking surveys and so on. If you take a closer look at this map, it published the next year, actually, an atlas that was in color. So this is just a closer look at the county I've been looking at, Dorchester County. If you take a close look, zoom in on the right, you see actually there's great information about roads, post offices, courthouses, even locations of individual churches, mills, what types of mills, schools, and so on. I thought this is incredibly useful information for reconstructing these places of protection and risk. You can see in the southeast corner of the blow up here, this Bucktown post office. That's basically the photo I showed you in the very beginning, where Harriet Tubman had that object hit her in the head. The legend on this particular map has a really rich set of information about all these different kinds of churches and mills and so on that was very useful. And what I did here is basically try and create a GIS database of these historical features from this map. So I was able to download a high-resolution geotiff from davidrumsey.com. Thanks to them for that opportunity. I downloaded a comprehensive road centerline file from the Maryland Department of Transportation and overlaid it on top of the historical map. Like I said, there hasn't been a huge amount of development of this area, so these historical roads match up pretty nicely with, you know, the modern road layer. So because this map was made in you know, the 1860s, obviously there's going to be some error in the accuracy of the locations of certain features. And so what I did is to try and create this framework data set using the modern roads data. So I didn't just digitize the roads from the historical map. I basically visually, just looking at this overlay of the historic map with the modern roads layer, selected those modern roads that aligned with or represented those historic roads, and then just exported them to a new data layer, and then use that new roads data layer as kind of the framework on which to hang all the other features that I digitized as a representation of those historical features. And you can see, you know, there's a lot of error, but I couldn't recognize any like systematic error in the historic map with regards to the modern roads data set, which I was actually thankful to see. So the georeferencing I felt pretty good about. And of course, I was completely blown away by the ability of these people in the 1860s to make such an incredibly geographically accurate map of this region without flying in an airplane or anything like that. It's just mind-blowing, really. But then I went ahead and started digitizing all the features that I saw. This was an incredibly time-consuming project that sort of took me back to my master's thesis, frankly, which I haven't done in a while, but it was a lot of fun. I digitized churches and, you know, included their denomination by attributing them in the attribute table, shops, mills, locations of schools, post offices, landings, bridges, and ferries, because there's a ton of waterways in this area. Minor towns, major towns defined as the town with a courthouse. Also digitized, you know, had all those roads, and I extracted all those roads, intersections. I used the Maryland State Plane Coordinate Reference System and just did an incredible amount of manual editing to improve the accuracy of these things, remove the pseudonodes, ensure topologic integrity. For instance, a modern road would go, you know, bridge over a river. Well, that bridge wasn't there probably in 1850. So in the, you know, look at the map, not there. I gotta, you know, basically chop that one road into two separate roads and so on. So spent a whole lot of time doing that. In terms of identifying what's risky and what's protective, some of it is intuitive in the sense that anywhere that was, you know, populated by people was a place of danger. So anywhere like a town, a post office, mill, school, a road intersection, those are dangerous places. And the idea was that these natural places like forests and marshes and swamps and whatnot would offer places of concealment. But I did read this book. This is an amazing book by William Still. He's an African-American abolitionist in Philadelphia, and he was basically an agent on the Underground Railroad, but this was a major destination for people escaping from slavery. And they would come to Philadelphia and see. I mean, he basically wrote down all the stories of hundreds and hundreds of escapees from slavery, many of them coming up through Maryland. And he published them in this book in 1871. And reading, I read the entire.
Sorry to interrupt. You only have 2 minutes left.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Incredible stories in this book. And that's basically where I derived some of these sort of forces of protection and risk. And I'm going to skip ahead a little bit just to show you that basically because you're in GI science and cartography, I probably don't need to explain too much that basically I did a weighted overlay of distances to these different features that conferred risk and protection to places in the landscape and made a hillshade of it to sort of represent these kind of landscapes of risk and protection. And then I did a least cost path analysis just as an example of how someone might escape from one place to a place going north, stopping at particular locations that might have offered protection. Places like Quaker meeting houses or free African American churches and so on. This isn't to represent any individual or, reading the stories. This isn't, any individual's actual path. They may not have known exactly where to go. They were following the North Star and so on. But it's really a prototype of how to proceed. So I know I'm out of time. I'll stop here. I'll let you read some of these conclusions. But I'll just say in conclusion that moving forward, a student I'm working with is now digitizing these features for a number of other counties. And I'm hoping to publicly release these data and allow others to be able to use them in their own research and so on. So thanks very much and happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, do we have questions for Jeremy? Yeah.
So I have a questions about, do you consider using algorithms to detect all the features in historical maps? Because so I'm currently working as a research associate at Cura at Ohio State University, and we are working on a project to kind of understand how the freeway construction in Ohio destroyed some neighborhoods using historical maps like sandbar maps. And we developed some algorithms to detect all the buildings on the sandbar maps and other features, because there are lots of sandbar maps in the US, and we want to make it like a scalable framework. And because we know that in other cities in the US, like LA and Philadelphia, there are some other ghost neighborhoods as well, destroyed by urban renewal and other redlining policies. And we try to make it like a scalable framework. So I was just curious, do you consider some automatic detection methods in so be involved in this research in the future, or yeah.
Yeah, thanks for your question. Yes, and boy, that would save me a lot of time. I would absolutely love that. I don't know that much about it, so if you would, let me know how I can get in contact with you, and I'd love to learn more about that. When I was at UCGIS, the meeting that this past June, I went to a workshop. I can't remember who did it. Name escapes me for some reason. Maybe it was similar research to what you're talking about, but they were talking about the automatic extraction of annotation from maps, and it was a really interesting presentation. I just couldn't quite figure out how to make it work for my particular project. So I'm really doing it all manually, which is incredibly time consuming. If our ability to do this automatically is there yet, to do it in a way that I'm really confident that it will be accurate, and as accurate as it is or close, frankly, as someone doing it manually. I'd certainly, love to participate in something like that and use that kind of tool.
Questions? Do we have anything you have in the chat? Chat questions? Okay. Well, thank you, Jeremy, for that interesting presentation.